The Ferrari SF-25 promised to be a revolution, but pre-season testing has left a good impression. Are the drivers wondering how a car with 99% new parts still suffers from the same old problems? Before I tell you why the SF-25 could make life difficult for Hamilton, tell me in the comments. Do you think Ferrari has made a mistake with this design? Fundamental in its design to try to close the gap with its rivals. The most notable modification is the use of pull rod suspension on both the front and rear axles, making it the only team on the grid to adopt this configuration. The aim behind this change is to optimize the aerodynamic flow around the car, allowing for greater efficiency in air management and, in theory, improving stability in high-speed corners. The transition to a pull rod system on the front axle has required a significant restructuring of the chassis. The upper suspension arm has been repositioned at a 90-degree angle to the chassis, a modification that frees up space to improve aerodynamics at the front. At the same time, the rear pull rod system has allowed for a more compact design at the rear, reducing airflow interference over the beam wing and the rear of the car. However, these types of modifications are not without risks. Former Ferrari engineer Rob Smedley has already warned that radical changes to the suspension can negatively affect the car's dynamics, something that seems to have been confirmed in pre-season testing. The first on-track analyses have shown that the configuration chosen by Ferrari could be causing more problems than it solves. During the sessions in Bahrain, the SF-25 showed marked instability in the rear axle, forcing the drivers to make constant corrections to maintain the ideal line. This characteristic has been especially noticeable in fast corners, where the car seems to lose stability when exiting the corner, a problem that compromises traction and makes early acceleration difficult. The car's handling has also generated reactions among analysts and former drivers. Alex Brundle described the SF-25's handling as really unpleasant, referring to Lewis Hamilton's difficulty in maintaining control on corner entry. The tendency to understeer mid-corner and rear-end instability on exit have raised doubts as to whether Ferrari will be able to correct these problems in time for the start of the season. Another major change to the SF-25 has been the redesign of the side pods and cooling system. Ferrari has introduced a larger radiator inlet compared to its predecessor, along with an overbite side pod wing design and new rear spoiler lip. The shark fin on the engine cover has also been removed, a decision that appears to be linked to the need to improve aerodynamic flow at the rear of the car. The side pod design follows a similar philosophy to Red Bull's, but with a more aggressive interpretation in the way airflows are channeled through the bodywork. The SF-25's three-dimensional sculpting in this area is much more pronounced than on previous models, suggesting that Ferrari has opted for an extreme aerodynamic solution to find additional performance. However, these modifications could also be contributing to the stability problems seen on track. The SF-25 represents a completely new concept for Ferrari, a car that the team says has the potential to evolve throughout the season. The big question is whether this evolution can be done quickly enough to compete with the more stable and predictable cars from McLaren, Mercedes, and Red Bull. Ferrari has bet everything on an innovative design, but initial testing has shown that there is still a lot of work to be done to turn this bold proposal into a winning car. Pre-season testing is the first real indicator of car performance before the start of the season, and the SF-25 has left more questions than answers. Ferrari arrived in Bahrain with the intention of evaluating the impact of its technical innovations and measuring its competitiveness against teams such as Red Bull, McLaren, and Mercedes. However, the results obtained on track have cast doubt on the effectiveness of its new concept. One of the most worrying aspects has been the stability of the car. Throughout the test sessions, both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton have experienced difficulties in finding the optimal balance. In high-speed corners, the rear axle showed obvious signs of instability, forcing the drivers to make constant corrections to keep the car on the ideal trajectory. The lack of confidence in the rear axle not only compromises the race pace, but also increases tire wear, a problem that Ferrari has dragged on in previous seasons and which seems to remain unsolved. The team has worked to adjust the rigidity of the car, seeking better response at the entrance to the corner and greater stability at the exit. However, this solution has generated an unwanted side effect: less efficient aerodynamics in medium and high-speed corners. The SF-25 seems to lose downforce at critical moments, which compromises its performance on circuits that demand a precise balance between top speed and stability in the corner. Another factor that has generated concern is the direct comparison with the closest rivals. During race simulations, McLaren demonstrated better traction on corner exits, allowing it to maintain a more consistent speed without compromising tire durability. Mercedes, meanwhile, showed greater overall stability and a more consistent race pace. Red Bull, while not exhibiting absolute dominance in testing, remains a threat due to its ability to develop throughout the season. One of the most telling moments occurred when Lewis Hamilton completed his first runs with the SF-25. Alex Brundle, an analyst and former driver, observed that the car seemed difficult to handle and described its behavior as really unpleasant. In several corners, Hamilton had to correct aggressively to prevent the car from becoming unstable, a clear sign that the SF-25's balance is not fully resolved. The image of Hamilton struggling to control the car reinforces the idea that Ferrari still has a lot of work to do before the start of the season. The team has attempted to play down concerns by arguing that track conditions may have affected the SF-25's performance. They have also pointed out that the car was loaded with extra fuel and aerodynamic measurement sensors for much of the testing, which could have influenced its overall performance. However, these explanations do not dispel doubts about Ferrari's ability to compete at the highest level from the first race. Preseason testing has made it clear that Ferrari needs to make significant adjustments to optimize the SF-25's performance. Rear-end instability, tire degradation, and difficulty in finding a balanced setup are all issues that need to be addressed before the Melbourne Grand Prix. The key will be the team's ability to interpret the data collected in Bahrain and translate it into concrete improvements in the coming weeks. Ferrari has opted for an aggressive development philosophy, but testing has shown that pure speed is not enough if the car does not offer drivers confidence. With the season expected to be extremely competitive, any weakness can make the difference between fighting for wins or falling behind on the grid. The level of competitiveness in the 2025 Formula One season will be higher than ever, and Ferrari not only has to deal with its own challenges, but must also measure its performance against teams that have shown significant progress. Preseason testing in Bahrain has revealed a clear picture in which Red Bull, McLaren and Mercedes seem to have found more effective solutions to extract the maximum performance from their cars. Red Bull remains the benchmark of the grid despite its preseason testing not showing absolute dominance. The Milton Keynes team has opted for a different approach, focusing more on maximizing performance on fast laps than on consistency on long runs. During the test sessions, their engineers worked on optimizing the balance between the front and rear axle, adjusting the front wing settings to reduce the tendency towards understeer that plagued the RB21 in its early testing. Although there is still room for improvement, Red Bull's ability to develop its car throughout the season represents a constant threat to Ferrari and the rest of the grid. McLaren has been the team that has surprised the most in preseason, showing a balanced car with solid race pace. Its ability to maintain speed in slow corners without compromising stability in fast corners has been one of its strong points. Lando Norris achieved competitive times in race simulations, benefiting from a well-balanced rear end that allowed him to accelerate before his rivals at the exit of the corners. Ferrari, in comparison, has shown difficulties in finding the optimal ride height, which has affected the distribution of aerodynamic load and generated inconsistencies in the performance of the SF-25 in different sectors of the track. Mercedes has taken a step forward compared to last season, achieving a more stable and predictable setup. Unlike Ferrari, which has opted for a radically different concept, the Brackley team has followed an evolutionary path with its car, optimizing the strengths of its previous design. On long runs, Mercedes has demonstrated efficient tire management, allowing it to maintain a consistent pace without suffering excessive degradation. This represents a problem for Ferrari, which continues to struggle with premature tire wear, a weakness that had already been evident in past seasons. The competitive landscape of the 2025 season suggests that Ferrari will have to evolve quickly if it wants to stay in the championship fight. McLaren and Mercedes have shown solid progress in managing the car's aerodynamics and stability, while Red Bull maintains its ability to develop key improvements throughout the year. The big question is whether Ferrari will be able to find effective solutions in the first few races or whether it will need several updates before reaching its full potential. The Italian team has opted for an innovative concept with the SF-25, but testing has shown that the competition has not been left behind. With performance margins increasingly tight, any technical advantage or setup error can make the difference between fighting for wins or falling behind on the grid. The first race in Melbourne will be the ultimate test to see whether Ferrari has taken the right path or whether its rivals have managed to overtake them before the start of the championship. Ferrari has taken on a huge challenge with the SF-25, betting on a radical concept that seeks to squeeze the most out of the current rules before the big regulatory change in 2026. The decision to almost completely redesign its car reflects the team's ambition to break away from the limitations that have kept it out of the championship in recent years. However, preseason testing has made it clear that this transformation has not been easy and that, for now, the performance of the SF-25 raises more questions than certainties. Ferrari's objective was clear: to develop a car that could not only compete with Red Bull and McLaren from the start of the season, but also have enough room for evolution to stay in the fight throughout the year. To do so, they introduced significant structural changes, such as the adoption of pull rod suspension on both axles and an aggressive redesign of the aerodynamics. These modifications were implemented with the intention of improving the car's aerodynamic efficiency and stability, but so far they have not yielded the expected results. Testing in Bahrain has shown that the SF-25 setup is still far from optimal. The instability of the rear axle, the difficulty in finding a suitable ride height, and excessive tire degradation remain unresolved problems. These weaknesses have prevented Ferrari from extracting the maximum performance from the car, leaving the team in a position of uncertainty before the start of the season. One of the biggest questions is whether Ferrari will be able to find solutions in the first races, or whether it will need a series of updates before it can compete at the level of Red Bull, McLaren, and Mercedes. The team's development capacity will be key to determining whether this technical gamble becomes a competitive advantage or whether it will end up being a handicap that is difficult to correct. The human factor will also play a decisive role in the success or failure of the SF-25. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton have the experience and talent to push any car to the limit, but even the best drivers need a solid foundation to be able to compete at the highest level. Leclerc has been cautious in his comments, pointing out that there is still a lot of work to be done, while Hamilton has struggled to adapt to a car that has very different characteristics to what he is used to at Mercedes. The 2025 season will be a test for Ferrari, with the first races revealing whether the SF-25 is a revolution in the making or a gamble that will need more time to bear fruit. If the team can fix the problems detected in preseason, it still has scope to become a serious title contender. But if the car's weaknesses persist, Ferrari risks falling behind in a grid that is more competitive than ever. The SF-25 is the reflection of an ambitious and risky strategy. It could become the key piece that takes Ferrari back to the top, or a reminder that radical changes do not always guarantee success. The only certainty is that the ultimate answer will come on the track, where every tenth of a second will make the difference between glory and frustration.